guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
All right, everybody. Hi, welcome back.
Hi, everyone.
We're so excited to have you guys here. First things first, happy Women's History Month.
Oh, yeah. We're recording this on the 1st of March, so
We are.
the first day.
It is. It's the first day of Women's History Month, and I can't think of a better way to kick it off.
Oh, me either.
I can't think of a better way to kick it off. I'm very excited to dive into this week's episode because not only is it a really amazing story, but we've been fortunate enough to get some real hands-on information for you guys.
Yeah. It's become really special to us
This
really
episode
quickly.
this episode is very special. We're not just going to be spitting facts at you guys, although we will be giving you guys plenty of information and plenty of facts. But we will also be telling you the amazing story of Josephine Pitts Egan, who is, in my eyes, and I think, Winnie, you might agree with me here, she was more than just the wife of John Egan from the 100th Bomb Group.
Yeah. And
she was a force in her own right.
Yeah. I think we both feel really grateful and privileged to be able to have the information we have now. And it's been really difficult to sit on it and not tell anyone until they hear this. So yeah.
Yes. So without further ado, let's dive in. Let's talk about the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, also known as the WASP.
Yes.
I'm going to be very honest. Going into this, I assumed they were part of the military.
Oh, so did I. I assumed that they were like I think you said this to me recently, where you thought that they were kind of like an offshoot, where the WAC were an offshoot of the army.
Yes.
I think we both assumed when we first began research into this that we thought that they were the offshoot of the
Air Force.
The Air Force.
They weren't.
And they were not. I didn't even know about them until we began researching. But like in England, we don't really cover American history. And even if we do talk about World War II, but again, it's Hitler was bad, men went overseas, and it's very men focused. It's never anything.
Yes. And it's the same, or at least when I was in school.
Yeah.
It's very much the same. The men went overseas, America fought the war against Hitler. America fought in the war against Japan.
Yeah.
You really don't get anything about women's military history in school here in the States. But what we do learn about, and I remember this very, very vividly because I did do a school project on her many, many years ago. We do learn about Amelia Earhart.
See, we didn't learn about Amelia Earhart, but I had this really odd fascination with her because there was a documentary on TV when I was really young, and it told her story, and for some reason I forgot most of it until now. But there was a certain bit that stuck with me, was that after she disappeared, people thought she had like gone to live anonymously, and they had picked up this woman that they thought was her.
I remember that part a bit too for my project. I had to do a whole project on somebody, and I picked Amelia Earhart, and I remember being very fascinated with, oh my God, she was a woman and she was flying a plane in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And just very enamored with it at a young age. And then, you grow up and your fixations kind of shift and change.
Yeah.
But she's a name that you immediately associate with, female aviation.
Yes,
I would say the godmother of female aviation. And if you don't know about the WASP, then I would say that names like Jacqueline Cochran and Nancy Harkness Love do not resonate the same as Amelia Earhart.
Yes, I do think, Amelia Earhart's name is synonymous with women flying. She was the one that sort of paved the way and started it all. And I would even say that she paved the way for this to happen. Because without Amelia Earhart flying in the 30s, I don't feel like a whole bunch of women would have gone out and got their licenses.
No,
They
I
would not
don't
have begun to fly without seeing her first. It wouldn't have gone
know.
as mainstream as it did, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And I think it's a sign of the times as well that the 30s were, aviation was kind of picking up and families would
Yeah.
gather on the weekends and go to these big fields and go to an air show and watch a pilot do, barrel rolls and nosedives for fun.
Yeah.
And kids would become enamored with it. And I think
Yep.
a lot of girls started to realize, well, why can't I do that? Which
Yeah.
led to this booming, I guess, this boom of women signing up for flying lessons in the 1930s and going out and getting their pilot's license.
Mm.
And they would have to take very extensive training, and then they would have to do X amount of hours as a solo flight. So flying
Yeah.
alone without your instructor in the plane. And then they would be granted a license, and then they would have to go and do additional training and classes in order to get a commercial license, which would be where you could take people up in the plane with you.
Yeah. Because it was during the Depression as well, I read that a lot of the women sort of bartered for lessons.
Yes.
They would do it for trades, they would do it for other means of work.
They would maybe work as a secretary, like
Yeah.
in the office at the
In the
flying
office
school or
itself.
something,
Yeah.
and I'll give you X amount of hours if you give me flying lessons.
Yeah. Which, honestly, very, very good initiative from the
Smart
women.
of them. Very smart of
smart
them.
to think like that, because they
Yeah.
wanted to do it so badly that they would do anything in order to be able to fly. And
Yeah.
I love reading about that they would essentially barter
Yeah.
for flying lessons.
It's definitely been this has definitely been one of the most interesting topics I feel like we've been researching so far.
Yeah.
We've been reading a lot, and I think that some of these books have been some of the most interesting books I've actually gotten my hands on lately. And
Oh, me too. I completely agree. Because we started with Silver Wings by
yes, The
Catherine
Women with
Sharp
Silver
Landeck.
Wings,
And I feel
which
like that was a really good intro
I think that
into
was the
it.
perfect way to kind of lead into the WASP.
Yeah, it was a very good introduction because it read very much like a story as opposed to, facts and information and things like that. It
And it
read,
also, like, every chapter was a different woman's story.
yes,
And it was like always, it was an abridged version of their story, but it was enough to kind of get you to the next point of, okay,
this
she
is what
got her
happened.
license,
Yeah,
and her husband was a pilot and he flew in the war, and
yeah,
they were a couple who met on an airfield, and then when he was drafted or he was, called up to go serve, she went and did X, Y, and Z and
yeah,
continued to fly. And I think that leads the way into how a lot of these women even got involved in a
yeah,
military capacity, even though
yeah,
it technically wasn't a military role.
yes,
Um, I mean, you take people like Nancy Love, who was the creator of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron.
yes. I really enjoyed, I feel like the information on her is slightly more minimal as opposed to Jackie Cochran.
I think she sat
Because
herself in a slightly more minimalistic role.
she did.
She didn't go out jumping for the spotlight.
She
Jackie
just,
Cochran, and this is no slight to Jackie Cochran, she
yeah, of
did
course.
wonderful things for women's aviation and the
Yeah,
WASP program. Jackie Cochran, I think, because she was already a name, she had a cosmetics company.
yeah,
She had, she was part of a lot of social clubs and, social circles. She was well known, and I hate to say she had money at the
yeah, that
time.
kind of
She married
influenced a
into
lot of
money.
things. Yeah,
She was already a name. People knew who she was.
yeah,
So when she took up flying, it was almost no surprise that she was going to, I think, push the extra mile for women to
oh,
serve in
for
the war.
sure. Because I believe Hap Arnold rejected Nancy's initial plan. because he
Yeah.
said there was no need for female pilots.
Yes,
But less,
General Arnold rejected Nancy Love's original plan, which was to just get women flying in the war effort.
yeah,
And they, from what I understand and the way the story reads, is that Nancy Love kind of accepted that, but also kind of sunk back a little bit to take stock of why he said no
yes,
and then readdress it. Whereas Jackie Cochran would push and push and push because, well, I'm Jackie Cochran is
that's
kind
what
of
she
the vibe
wanted.
I got from her.
Yeah, I feel like both were correct.
Yes.
I feel like,
Mhm.
Nancy Love accepting no as an answer and then sort of, like you said, reassessing. And I also feel
Yeah.
like Jackie Cochran was also correct to keep pushing and pushing, because I believe she herself wanted to break the glass ceiling and wanted other women to be able to do that. But I respect both of their ideas. I do love that Nancy just wanted women to fly while these men
Yes.
were overseas and fighting in combat. She really just wanted to help.
Mhm.
She wanted the women um to fit in for the men and get the plane from factory to destination.
Right. Which is
Whereas,
where we get the birth of the ferrying squadron.
yes, whereas Jackie wanted a little bit more.
She wanted military recognition.
Yes.
Um, and I think all of this changed, or it did, all of this did change. And the perspective of General Arnold changed when America joined the war.
Yes, because initially wasn't it like the lend lease that kind of
Yes.
kicked it off?
There was the Lend-Lease, which was that America would
Essentially
essentially
lend planes
lend
to
their
England.
time and their services to Britain because America was not yet involved directly in the war. Britain was already at war,
Hmm.
and Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease.
I believe we covered that a little bit in the previous episode about Rosie the Riveters, where we
Yes,
mentioned the lend lease, and then the women in the
yes, we did.
factories were making the warships to then
Mhm.
give to England, but that
Right.
it was short lived because America joined the war anyway.
And then this version of the Lend-Lease, or this division of the Lend-Lease, was that we as Americans would ferry planes
To and
to
from.
lend to Britain,
Yes.
which then depleted our own arsenal of planes on the heels of us joining the war.
It did. Yeah. Kind of sunk everything back
It did. It did.
a
I think I
little
remember
bit.
reading somewhere that we had 8 at the time. America had like 800 planes ready to go, and more than half were not viable to make the trip overseas at the time.
Oh my goodness. And even then, bringing them overseas, I don't think they allowed women to fly them overseas. They had to get them to like a certain
They were to
point
ferry
and then
them
they
from
were,
factory to base, and then the men would take them overseas.
wow. So even if they are getting to fly, they're still not being allowed the full job.
No.
But
They Once America joined the war, it dawned on Roosevelt and it dawned on General Arnold that men needed to be released in
yeah,
capacity to fight. And then who would ferry these planes?
there's no one else but women.
Enter Jackie Cochran and Nancy Love.
Yeah.
Women can do it. And
Women
now,
can do it,
women
yes.
can do anything.
Oh yeah, but
Women can do anything. And I know I said it last time that when Rosie the Riveter's catchphrase of "we can do it," we can do it all.
we can do it all. I
I'm
completely agree.
I stand by that wholeheartedly. They can do it all, these women, and they learned the hard way, I feel like. The upper echelon of the military and the president learned the hard way by not releasing those men, I feel like, for military duty
Yeah.
earlier.
It's like they sort of panicked
Then
and
they
then
panicked and they said,
ran
well,
around
we
like
have no
headless
choice
chickens.
but to bring in the girls, right? We have no
Yeah.
choice but to bring in the girls.
Yeah.
Now what do we do? And at the time, Jackie Cochran was in Britain serving
With
as
the
part of, she
ATA,
was serving
right?
with the ATA. She was essentially running the ATA. She was the head of the ATA at that point.
Hmm.
And I think she had employed 50 women, 50
Yes.
British women to fly with the ATA. And they were ferrying planes back and forth in the UK.
I feel like she was happy enough with that until she caught wind of Nancy Love, then
She was very happy
almost,
with that. She was in a leadership position.
yeah, and then
And
she
then
heard
she
of,
caught wind of Nancy Love being the head of the women's ferrying squadron in the States, and she hightailed it back home.
that's when I start to not dislike her. I sort
Feel
of
a certain
start
way.
to, yeah,
Start to
I
feel a
don't
certain
like
way.
that. I feel like the purpose of, why didn't she just let her have it
You had a
in a
leadership role.
way? You
And
already
I
had
think,
your, yeah,
but I also think part of it is that because she had wanted it in America for so long and realized when she couldn't have it, she went to Britain. Now
and
somebody
then
else was
they,
getting what she had initially wanted.
yeah,
And I think that she was the kind of woman who never took no for an answer.
which was, proven by her life story of
Yeah.
she grew up extremely poor, she married extremely young, she had a baby very young, and then when all that kind of was over, she then changed her name to Jackie, and she became Jackie Cochran.
Cochran was the name of her first husband and she kept it,
Yes, she
but
kept
she
it even
changed her
though she
first name to
married.
Jacqueline,
Yes.
which I guess sounded better. Jacqueline
Yeah.
Cochran.
Jacqueline Cochran sounded a lot better
Because
than
when
her
she got
original
married for
name.
the second time, she did not take her husband's name, or
No,
she
she
didn't use
didn't.
her husband's name unless
Mm,
it was in a social event that required leverage of her husband's name because he came with the
yes,
money, was
exactly.
my understanding.
I
So
believe there was like a,
when she needed the money, she used her husband's name.
yes, but
But
when
in
it was
her
just
official
herself,
flying capacity, she was Jacqueline
she
Cochran.
was just herself. Um, because she, hot footed it back home to the US, both the ferrying squadron and the flying training detachment were both formed in 1942.
Yes, they
But then
decided to
they
give one to Nancy and one to
wanted
Jacqueline.
Jackie. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, they were both organized separately, but then they merged in 1943 to create the WASP. And the
right,
way that it worked was um, the WASP trained with Jackie, and then they were transferred over to Nancy to begin
right.
ferrying.
Right. So they were two separate entities. So Jackie headed up the ferrying training detachment and Nancy was the head of the auxiliary ferrying squadron.
Yes.
And then yes, like you said, the women would once it merged, the WASP was formed in 43, the women would be sent to Avenger Field in Sweetwater, Texas.
Yes, that was
That
their
was the head
training.
of WASP training, Avenger Fields in
Hmm.
Sweetwater, Texas. The women would have to find their own way there, pay their own way there,
Yeah.
and they would have to be invited. You couldn't just sign up. You
You
had
had to write
to
to them and then
pass, you
be
had to write to
invited.
them, you had to pass a physical exam, you had to
Yep.
pass a written test, you had to pass a flying test. Even if you had a pilot's license, you had to
Hmm.
pass a flying exam. You had to get up in the air and prove you could fly.
Yeah.
And then you had to wait for a letter from Jacqueline Cochran to say
Saying
that
yes
you
or
could
no.
come down to Texas. No, you could not come down to Texas.
Yeah.
And then they would make their way down to Texas and train
For months.
for months before they
It's
graduated.
and it's hot in Texas. It's very hot.
From what I understood, from what I remember reading, is that it was extremely hot, it was extremely dry and dusty, that the women would
Mm.
shower in their flying jumpsuits just to
In
get
their
the
zoot
dust off
suits.
in their
Yeah.
zoot suits, and then they would hang them up to dry
To
them
dry.
out so that they wouldn't be as dusty.
Yeah.
Um, and make no mistake, the US government and the US military was in no way prepared to outfit these women in, flying suits.
Yeah, they gave them men's zoot suits, didn't they? And they were big and
Yeah,
baggy
they didn't
and
have flight suits appropriately sized for these women.
no,
So whatever they had on hand that was left over was just kind of dished over to the girls.
like there you go.
And they would roll up the sleeves, roll up the legs, cinch the waist. And if you dig deep, there are photos of these women and they are practically drowning in
Oh
these
yeah,
flight
they're
suits.
all
Oh my gosh. These
but they look
teeny
like they're
tiny
having
women,
fun.
these teeny tiny women
Yeah.
drowning in men's sized flight suits. It proves just how badly they wanted to serve their country and
They
how
would
badly
just
they
do
wanted to fly.
anything. Yeah.
They would, it might, if it's a man's size 46 waist, who cares? I'm going to put it on and make the
Yeah,
best of it.
I'm still gonna fly in the airplane. I'm still gonna do it. They got their own uniform eventually, but
They did. Jackie Cochran designed them. Be
and she paid for
stunning,
all of
and she
them.
paid for all of them,
Yeah,
and she paid for their wings.
she
So
did.
there was
Yeah,
nothing for these women when they were graduating, and she wanted them to have wings the same as men.
yeah.
And she went into her own pocket and paid for the silver wings that every WASP earned on graduation day.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that's an incredible gesture.
I think so too. I think so too. And that's sort of when I stop feeling a certain way about her. I
Yes,
think
certain things, and I go, oh,
she was
I
she was
see
all
it.
right.
I see it.
But then there's the need to keep pushing all of the time. And I'm not sure if every book we've read on the Wasp is like a little bit biased, maybe. But the impression I get is that, like you said, Nancy was sort of in the background and sort of just doing the job that needed to be done.
They butted heads a
Um,
lot.
they really
Her and
did,
Jackie.
yeah.
They didn't get
I
along, and
No, not at
they
all.
would try to put on a face for the girls if they ever had to be in the
They were
same
civil.
place.
They
They
were
would be
civil, weren't
civil with
they?
each other, but they were
Yeah.
by no means friends.
I believe they were in the same social circle. Like they were both in the 99s. Like Jackie
Yes.
was president of the 99s after Amelia Earhart went missing.
Yes, she
So they were
was.
in a similar social circle, which I believe if you're a woman in aviation, you're going to be in a similar social circle no matter what.
In
Um,
in Women with Silver Wings, Catherine Landeck talks about how Jackie felt slighted in those social circles because people would flock to Nancy. People would
yeah, I remember that.
people would want to be around Nancy. She just had this easy air of just friendly and outgoing, and they
Yeah,
respected her as a pilot, and they felt like Jackie paid her way in because she had money, and they would
yeah,
almost humor her. They would humor her a
yes.
bit,
They sort of didn't take her seriously, and I think that contributes to her.
and Nancy not getting along very well.
Yeah, it also contributes to her attitude.
Yes.
Like as the story goes on, that we have learned it kind of contributes to. I mean, she was scrappy. She was
Well, she
hard.
was a fighter,
She
and
was a fighter.
she had health issues, and she still would get
Yeah,
up
and
and
do
fly
whatever.
and do
Yeah,
what she had to do. And, you know, she attended, I believe it was the first class of the WASP. So
she
class
did.
43-1.
Yeah,
Class 43-1. She had been in the hospital for surgery, and
and she
she
could
wasn't
barely
really ready to
stand.
leave yet. They had said to her, "You're not ready to go home." And she
Yeah, yeah. She could barely
insisted
stand. Something
on
like that.
pinning the first set of wings onto somebody.
Yeah. Which again, you see, your opinion sort of flip flops about her. Like,
Not that she was a bad, I don't by any means classify her as a bad person.
oh no,
I just
absolutely
think that
not.
in certain instances she could have acted differently.
Yeah, she didn't need to fight all of the time.
No.
She needed to sort of switch that off for a few minutes. And I believe we kind of had you and I had like a small discussion about it where we feel like when it got to the point of the WASP going for militarization, we don't think she ruined their chances, but we think the constant pushing sort of scuppered it, I guess.
Yes. Um, I mean, both Nancy and Jackie wanted the women to be militarized, but
Yes, but what one of them
Nancy,
fought more.
Jackie fought, but Jackie, I don't want to say she was pushy. I don't, but
Yeah, I don't like that word
I
really,
don't
but
like that word. In this instance, I don't like that word. Um,
yes.
she put herself in a lot of rooms to argue
Yeah.
the point of women needing to be militarized.
Was it too many rooms?
And there we go. Was it too many rooms that people eventually
Mm.
tired of it?
Because they did offer her some kind of solution where wasn't the bill initially
Yes, the WAC bill.
they could be with the
They
wax,
were
but
going to be part of the WAC detachment, which was
she was
part
like,
of the US
no.
Army. They would
Yeah,
have been militarized. They would have been a division of the WAC, which is the Women's Army Corps.
yeah,
Um, and Jackie shot it down because she wanted the women to stand on their own alongside the U.S. Army Air Force. She
Or
wanted them
or
to be
nothing.
the equivalent, the female equivalent of the Air Force,
Yeah.
not just a division of the Women's Army Corps,
Or
which
like an offshoot.
or an
Yeah.
offshoot. I get it. I see the point. I see why she wanted them to stand on their own, but I think she could have put their foot in the door that way, and then there would have
Yes.
been room
For more.
for more. And I think that might have been what hindered it, because these women flew as a civilian unit
Voluntarily.
alongside voluntary civilian unit alongside the U.S. Army Air Force.
Yeah.
So they received no benefits, no military benefits.
No,
They
no
were not
GI
eligible,
Bill.
no eligibility for the GI Bill. 38 of these women were killed during their ferrying
Yes.
service
Oh my
during the war.
goodness.
They did not receive a military burial. They were not allowed to drape the American flag over their coffins, and their families received nothing but a telegram that stated, "Where would you like us to send the body?"
Where would you like us to send the body? And they couldn't have a star in their window to
They
show
couldn't
that
put a
they
star
had
in
a
their
fallen
window. No,
soldier.
nothing. So
Um,
the need to fight for this militarization was very apparent
yeah, of course, for the fairness of
for the
everything.
fairness of it. And I think if they had just tacked on to the WAC bill,
It would have solved
it
a
would have
lot of
solved a lot of
problems.
problems. It would have solved a lot of issues. And then they
Yeah.
could have continued to say, okay, well, now we're in,
Mm.
we can
We can
let's
change it
branch out.
later.
Let's take
We can,
this
yeah,
and see what we can do with it from here. Because
we
now
can
we're
change
in.
it afterwards. Yeah. I also don't like how they were considered an experiment. I'm not sure if that hindered them later on
Oh, they use that word
because
so much.
they were an experiment.
Let's
And
experiment and see what these girls can do. They can fly.
I'll tell you what they can do. They flew
They
over 60
60
million
million
miles
miles, right? 60 million miles.
over the course of the WASP being active because it was disbanded just before the war ended because there was,
Dissolved, not even
yeah, oh
disbanded isn't
yeah,
even the word, dissolved.
dissolved because they were no longer needed because the
Which is
men were coming
such,
back.
I think that's such a crock.
They transported every type of military aircraft.
These women flew everything from fighter jets to bombers.
Yeah, the big
And
planes.
and they were used. I love this I love. Reading this part, oh, I was so tickled by it. I loved it. Men were afraid to fly the B-29.
They were, yes.
It had such a reputation
They were like, no, I can't do it.
It had such a dark reputation, the B-29 bomber, because there was engine fires,
Yes.
engine malfunctions. It was just not a good plane to fly and then Boeing made all these changes to it. They addressed every single issue, and men were still so afraid to get into this plane and fly it that the Air Force said, send in the girls.
And they did it. They got in
And
and they just went,
two women flew the B-29 Super Fortress,
yeah.
landed it, and the men were waiting for the pilot to come out. And their
And out
commander
pops
said,
these two
there's
women.
your pilots. And it was two women who had not been afraid to get behind the yoke of a bomber. And then that was the key for the men to say, well, if the girls did it, now we have to do it. If the girls could do it, we could do it.
To prove ourselves.
Which is the complete flip of the complete opposite spectrum of girls going, if boys could do it, I could do it. And I know I could do it.
Exactly.
Now it's, well, if the girls could do it, we have to do it because we can't be shown up by the girls.
Can't be embarrassed.
Can't be embarrassed by the girls. I loved that so much because I was like, yes, like I'm like the least equipped to be saying this, but you go, girl.
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
That phrase doesn't necessarily always sound so great coming out of my mouth, but you go, girl. Honestly.
A lot of these men were very sour about women doing this job. And I believe we read about
a lot of them were impressed. A lot of them were impressed. There was a very large number of them that loved it. And a lot of them were just sourpusses. Oh my gosh.
To the point where they would put sugar in the engines.
Yes, so that they had engine malfunction.
Yeah, and I feel like that was what contributed to a lot of the 38 deaths that we mentioned.
That's a staggering number of deaths for women who were not facing combat.
Yes, there was just malfunctions, crashes, men putting sugar in the gas tank. I believe the first 2 or 3 were kept hush by
Yes.
Jackie Cochran because she didn't want the program to end early. She didn't want it to blow up in everyone's faces, for want of a better phrase. But I don't like how she kept it a secret.
No.
She sort of was like, okay, this has happened. We just glaze over it. And I feel like the women deserved a little bit more respect than that.
They did, especially because they were not getting a funeral or a send-off equivalent to a gentleman, to a man.
A lot of it was taking
the
a lot of it was like, you know, taking the hat around, contribute what you can. So
the
that
women did. They would pass the hat around and contribute what they could just to give these women a proper burial.
A lot of the women would also take the train to the woman's hometown with her body to deliver the
remains.
body back to her like their parents, which broke my heart.
Yes.
The bluntness of the telegram, where would you like the body sent? And then these women are funding their own way to take them back to their home was so, I think, really sweet, but so sad. There was a woman we read about called Gertrude Tompkins, and she disappeared.
Gertrude Tompkins disappeared on a ferrying mission, and they still don't know what happened to her.
That's insane.
Her fate is still not known. And I think with all the technology we have today, there's got to be a way.
There has to be, you know,
there's got to be a way.
Something.
And I know for a long time, WASP records were sealed.
35 years after the experiment was dissolved, they were sealed for 35 years. And that's
again, there's that word.
Again, yeah. Guinea pigs.
It makes them sound like guinea pigs. They weren't. It really does. And there's so many amazing stories on the WASP. There really are. And, you know, we talked a lot just now about Nancy and Jackie, and they're the 2 big names that really pushed the WASP into the spotlight.
Yes.
But then after they were dissolved in 1944, which still I'm so angry about, because this goes back to the war is ending. It was December of 1944. America is in the thick of the Battle of the Bulge. Yes, we are not anywhere
in the
near,
middle of it.
Again, not anywhere near VE Day, not anywhere near the end. We're nowhere near VJ Day.
Yeah.
America's winning the war. No, America's in the thick of the Battle of the Bulge. Yeah. We don't know what's happening. Men are freezing and dying in the Ardennes.
Yeah.
And you're telling these women, we don't need you to ferry these planes anymore.
Because we've got a whole bunch of traumatized men coming back because they're traumatized and injured.
Yeah.
But we don't need you guys anymore because they're gonna be fine. Like, no, please.
And these poor women were forced to turn in their uniforms.
Yeah, you couldn't even keep them.
You couldn't keep your uniform. If you purchased the leather bomber, if you were one of the few that were fortunate enough to purchase a leather bomber jacket, you could keep it because you purchased it.
Yeah, and you
kept your wings.
That was that.
And that was it. Yeah. You turned in your uniform and you had to find your own way home from wherever your base was.
It was right before Christmas as well.
Right before Christmas, you had to find your way home from wherever you had been assigned.
And then you have to go home and explain at Christmas where you've been to other relatives and why you are now home.
Yeah. We both watched the same documentary. It was called We Fought Too.
We Served Too.
We Served Too. I'm sorry. Yeah. We Served Too. And it was all about the WASP. And a number of the women that they interviewed were saying that they had gotten home and people would say, well, what were you doing? You know, I served in the war. And I said, what were you doing in the war? I was ferrying planes. No, you weren't. Nobody believed them.
Women don't fly planes.
Women don't fly planes. Nobody believed them. So a lot of these women resolved to just not speaking about it.
Being quiet. And
they were just ashamed to speak of it. Not ashamed, but at that point, you'd rather not have to explain to people what you were doing and then watch them roll their eyes and go, no, you aren't.
Yeah.
You would just rather say, a lot of them resolved to saying that they were in a civil defense role.
Yes, they did.
You know, I served in a civil defense role. And that kind of was, okay, because it sounded very hush hush. So you wouldn't have to further explain it.
And then there was no further questions. And then they sealed the
They sealed the
files
WASP
for,
records for 35 years.
yeah.
35
And
years.
and I believe that they started lobbying again in the 70s because they said that these particular women in the Air Force in the 70s were the first women to fly planes in the Air Force. And
Yes.
our little gang of women that we're talking about said,
They said,
nope,
no, they're not.
incorrect. I was here
And
first.
yeah, I was here first.
Yeah.
And my God. And I
They
think,
fought
and
so
this
hard
is,
for it too.
they worked hard for it, those women. They worked so hard. And because the WASP records were sealed, you don't know a lot of these stories. You don't know about a lot of these women.
Nope.
A lot of these women, they didn't have the opportunity to tell their story. And I think Josie Pitts Egan is a perfect example of somebody whose story is not fully there.
No, it's not. I mean, a lot of people only know of her purely based on who she married after the war.
And we did not know of her until watching Masters of the Air. The very end, there's the credits at the very end. For anybody who hasn't seen it, they kind of give you a quick overview of what
happened after the war.
Certain members of the 100th did after the war. And there's a small little biography on John Egan at the end, that he returned home from the war and he reconnected with Josie Pitts, who was a WASP, and they married in 1945. And we just know Josie Pitts as the wife of John Egan.
I think
it says that she was a WASP at the end. Josie Pitts was a WASP, married John Egan.
Yeah. I think
and that's all we knew at the time. For a year. For a year, because now the show has been out for a year.
For a year, yeah.
For a whole year, the name Josie Pitts was just synonymous with John Egan's wife.
Yeah.
She is so much more than just John Egan's wife. I mean,
exactly. And I think the biggest thing that we have discovered is that you can't find anything about her unless you type in her husband's name and then you click on spouse on Wikipedia.
Yes.
And there she is. You can't just Google her.
No.
You have to go through. And I feel like even you and I sort of glazed over the fact that she was a WASP. And I think it was
very briefly. I said, oh, how cool.
Right as we started, planning to make the whole podcast together, I think we said, what should we cover? And I believe obviously we went through, the
number
Red
of
Cross,
topics. Yes.
Yeah, Red Cross and the Rosies and the WASP. And I think I said, I don't know much about them. And you said John Egan's wife was a WASP. And I'm like, oh my goodness, yes, she was.
She was.
And then we sort of left it for a while.
It for a bit, and we came back to it, and we realized we needed a little bit of help here with this one.
Yeah, because it's one of the unknown stories. It's one of the untold stories sort of that was pushed into the background.
And I'm very proud that we get to bring her to the forefront.
We do. It's been kind of weighing heavily on my mind that it's our job to do it, but it's a job I am happy to do because it's so great.
It's an honor, really.
Oh, yeah.
It's a full-blown honor to be able to talk about her.
From the horse's mouth as well, from the source of her daughter,
and yes,
who we've been very lucky to, speak with a couple times, and who gave us this wealth of information about her mother. Because again, not much is known about her except who she married. She was a WASP. I don't think we were even aware that she helped fight for the militarization in 77 to 79. It's only now that we've become aware of it.
And what better place to start with the fact that she flew her first solo flight at 16 years old.
She was still in high school.
Yeah. 1929, flew her first solo flight. Yep. Earned her pilot's license in 1930, and she was the first woman in Manitowoc, Wisconsin to earn a pilot's license.
which
first
is amazing.
woman in her city.
And then
Town.
on top of all that, she then went to University of Wisconsin, and she got a degree in chemistry. So she's smart and she's cool as heck.
She's smart and she's capable and she's a force. So by the time she's 22, she's got a pilot's license, a
And a
degree in
degree.
chemistry, and she's holding the title of first woman in Manitowoc to have a pilot's license.
Yes.
So in my eyes, an absolute force.
She graduated from Pursuit School in Brownsville, Texas in September of 43 and earned her wings as a WASP. And she was in 43 W5.
Right.
We
So
were lucky enough to see a WASP yearbook from the archives, thanks to the archivists at the Museum of Flight here in Seattle. We were sent a PDF copy of her little yearbook picture, which we'll upload at a later date. But that was really wonderful to see. And they put her nickname, as opposed to Josephine, I believe, they put Dodie.
yes,
Which I found really cute.
I think I'm not more impressed, but I was supremely impressed at what her daughter Katie told us when we spoke a few weeks ago, was that
yeah.
Josie was 5'3".
Yeah, she was only little.
And
she had to sit on her parachute, right?
She had to sit on her parachute
to look out
to see over the yoke and out the windshield to fly her planes. And from where she was stationed in Delaware, she would ferry 1 to 6 planes a day. Okay. So that's 1 to 6 planes a day from a factory in Long Island to various bases across the US.
Yeah, so, there and back multiple times.
There and back multiple times in a day.
Yeah.
Now these are planes with the engine capacity and the speed of a 1940s aircraft. This is not like
a commercial flight
like
now.
A commercial flight now, being a flight attendant and saying, "Oh, I went from here to there, and this was my day." These planes were not moving as fast.
No, they weren't. Absolutely,
I mean, they were moving for the time. They were moving, but they were not moving as fast. So imagine doing that 6 times a day.
She must have had so much upper body strength to keep that up.
I think she had landed at an airfield once. Katie told us this. She landed at an airfield and she, pulled the hatch back. She was in a fighter. So she was in a single seat. I think it was a P-51.
Yes, it was.
And one of the men that was there to greet her as she landed said to her, "Little girl, you better get out of that thing. You're on fire." And the plane was on fire.
Let me pop out.
She landed and she was ready to go. And they said to her, it was almost like, do you know that
you realize
your plane is on fire? But the way he said it, "Little girl, you better get out of there. Your plane's on fire." Seeing photos of her and then imagining like just the look on her face.
Yeah.
There's just been something very special about all of this.
Yeah. Fighter planes were her favorite, right? She was quoted as saying flying pursuits.
She was quoted as saying that flying a Pursuit, which was we now call them fighters, was her favorite type of plane to fly. And Katie had said she always tells people, "My father flew bombers and my mother flew fighters."
Isn't that so cool? I love that so much.
But she did fly bombers. I think she flew every type of plane in the war.
She did, yes.
She ferried every type of military aircraft, but fighters were her favorite.
Yes.
Almost as if to say to leave the bombers to her husband. And hey, you take the bombers and I'll take the fighters and I'll meet you somewhere in the middle.
What he enjoyed. They were both, very involved in each other's careers.
They were. He was in awe of her, I believe, from before he came home from the war.
Yes, because Katie told us about the
letter he wrote to her from the Stalag.
Yeah, saying this is a great job. Thank you for your service.
And he had received a letter from his parents.
Yes, telling
And
her
they
that.
had said to him, oh, Josie from school is serving in the WASP.
Yeah.
And he wrote to her while he was being held prisoner of war. And he wrote to her to tell her, thank you. I
It's
think what you're
so
doing is
nice.
amazing. And oh my God.
It's so sweet.
It's so sweet. And
Yeah.
there we go back to not every man was against women flying
Yeah,
planes in
not
the war.
every single man was, to the point that he swore her into the reserves, didn't he?
He did. He swore her in when the WASP disbanded, were dissolved in 44. It wasn't until 1949 that the military agreed to let the women who had served in the WASP join the U.S. Army Reserve in a non-flying capacity.
Yeah. So they again just
And
took that away.
they took they took away the one thing that these women wanted to do, they took it away again.
They took it away.
But they were granted acceptance into the reserve in 49. And
yes,
ever the supportive husband, John Egan swore his
he
wife
swore
into the
her
reserve.
in. Which
And
we have that.
if you go to our Instagram, there's a
Yes.
wonderful photo courtesy of the Egan family of John swearing his wife into the reserves. He looks proud.
He looks so proud and so happy to be there. And it's so sweet.
He does. It's such a nice thing to see a husband proud of his wife.
Yeah.
For doing more than just, cooking and cleaning the house.
Yeah. And that she absolutely wasn't. I feel like she was a strong woman that knew what she wanted.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that worked well for them. They because he remained enlisted.
Enlisted and active until he died in 1961.
Yeah.
He served in Korea.
Yes.
And then they lived in places like Japan and Hawaii with their two daughters. And I remember Katie had said that, Hawaii was fun.
Hawaii was her favorite.
Hawaii was her favorite.
Said,
and they moved back to Manitowoc when John was serving in Korea.
Yeah.
But then when he became stationed at the Pentagon,
yes,
they lived in the Virginia area near DC.
They lived in Virginia, yeah.
And then they stayed there. Even after he passed away, they stayed there until Katie and her sister left for college.
Yep. And then they moved to Colorado, correct? Yeah. And then Josie followed after.
When she moved to Colorado at 50 years old, she took up skiing.
She did. Yes, I was about to say, what a life of adventure she lived.
There's an article that Katie, their daughter Katie, sent to us that is kind of a very nice timeline of Josie's service and a nice overview of her time in the WASP, and then a bit of her after service life.
Yeah.
And she took up skiing at 50 and loved it so much that she skied until she was 84.
And she went to visit the penguins a few times.
Yes. She visited all 7 continents.
She did, yeah.
Antarctica 3 times because she wanted to visit the penguins. And I think that is so girl, you skied till you were 84.
Yeah.
And you visited Antarctica 3 times.
Yeah. I think that was the story when we were trying to be so serious and professional, but that was when we cracked and giggled when we were told that she went to visit the penguins a whole bunch of times. And I love that.
It's a testament to what she did. And she was right there alongside all her fellow WASP during their fight in the 70s.
Yeah.
Up until the 70s, the WASP, they received nothing. No veterans benefits.
They weren't even remembered.
No military benefits. And to go back to what we said earlier, that when the Air Force said that the women who were joining in the 70s were the first women to join the Air Force and the first women to fly. That must have been
such a kick in the teeth.
Oh, God,
what a stab
to the gut for that.
Yeah.
These women stood up and said, no, it wasn't you, it was us.
I was here first. And then
we were here first began. And they fought. And they enlisted the help of General Hap Arnold's son.
Yes, they did.
And he felt so compelled.
Yeah.
He felt so compelled to finish his father's work with these women.
That he carried on the legacy.
Stood alongside them.
Yeah.
while
And
they
it
fought.
worked.
And Josie worked in WASP headquarters in DC during the push for Congress to grant these women military status. And there's a number of photos of her in Congress and in the Pentagon during this time.
Yeah.
And like you can see that she's older in these photos, but you can also see that in this fight,
she's
for
still
what
got
they
it.
believe is right and what they deserve and what they know that they deserve, in this whole fight, she's still, you can see it in her eyes in these photos.
She's fierce.
She's fierce, and she's determined, and she's still that 20-something woman who's going to get behind the controls of a fighter and do her job. And her job during the war was to ferry planes. Her job in the 70s was to make sure people knew that they ferried these planes.
And I believe that was when they received their discharges and things like that. Is that
they had received a certificate in the 40s
to say thanks.
You did it. And it was the exact same certificate that men received when they were honorably discharged.
Yes. And I believe that's sort of what kicked off the thing in the 70s. It was the
same certificate that they received for honorable discharge. And it wasn't until 1977
that someone
realized
the women
who flew with the WASP were considered military, active military during World War II.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that someone who held the rank of first lieutenant would absolutely be considered a part of the military and not just the reserves. So I feel we have had so much fun learning about her, you know, not just as Bucky Egan's wife. And I wish we had got to see more of her throughout like the documentaries we've watched and the books.
You get a quick glimpse of her in a photo.
You do, yeah.
We have been so lucky, and we're incredibly thankful to Katie and the Egan family and everybody that's been helping us to tell this story. I mean, I don't think thank you is an adequate word, but that's what we can say for right now is thank you. And thank you for trusting us with this.
Yes, exactly. We have a whole selection of people to thank for making a lot of this happen. First of all, as we've already mentioned, we'd like to thank Katie, who is Josie and John Egan's daughter. We'd also like to thank Matt Mabe of the 100th Bomb Group, who put us in touch with Katie and who also trusted us to tell this story. A big thank you to Cara over at the St. Louis Archives, who has been a wealth of information, giving us scanned files and reports, which are really special artifacts to look at that we feel really privileged to have access to. We'd also like to thank Chris at the Museum of Flight here in Seattle, who I mentioned earlier gave us an image of the yearbook of the class that Josie was in. We were granted access to some things from the WASP Museum in Sweetwater, which has been, again, so special to look at. And we'd also like to thank the CAF Rise Above WASP, who a lot of the information that we have given throughout the episode wouldn't be possible without their hard work as well.
It takes a village, doesn't it?
It takes a whole village. It truly does. And the amount of help that we have received and the amount of people that have been excited for this one, I really hope that we have done it justice. And this is only part one. We have more coming.
There's more coming on the WASP from us, because there's more stories to tell. And there's
what a labor of love that
there's
this
more. There is so much more out there, and these women deserve to have a story told.
Yeah.
And this goes for every woman who served in the war in any capacity, from a donut dolly to an army nurse to a flight nurse to a civilian pilot who waited 35 years for military and veterans benefits. They all deserve to have a story told, because there is a story for every single face
Yeah.
And we're going to do our absolute best to do them justice. There are a beautiful selection of photos of Josie Egan on our Instagram, courtesy of the Egan family.
Yes, go take a look at those. They
We
have been so
implore you to
wonderful.
take a look at them to see just how strong she was.
Yeah.
And
They're beautiful pictures.
Also, if you have the time, very highly recommend reading The Women with Silver Wings.
Yep.
Once again, a tremendous thank you to everybody that helped push this episode along and get us where we needed to be with information and photos. And God, you guys are all top notch in my book.
All great. All great.
All great.
And then thank you to you guys for listening again. We hope you enjoyed this one.
We sure did.
And we will see you next time.
Yes, we'll be back in 2 weeks. So don't miss us too much.
Bye.
Bye.